This is Moshe Taragin for the OU All Parsha video series for Parshas Bereishit. I'm recording this on the day that we, of course, are saying Hallel to Hashem. Zeh Yom Asa Hashem Nagila v'nismechavo Hod L'Hashem Ki Tov Ki Li'olam Chazdo Meis Hashem Haisazos Hi Niflas Beinenu. The day that 20 of our hostages are being returned, and hopefully many, if not all, of those who were murdered by the Rishayim, Arurim, are being returned for Kavura Be'eretz Yisrael and Menuchas Olam in Eretz Yisrael. Parshas Bereishit, of course, has a lot to discuss. Even if we want to take it, as I sometimes try to do an overarching picture of the entire Parsha, doesn't easily lend itself to that. Instead, I wanted to focus on four crucial, seminal, resonant Pesukim from the second parak, as the Rav, of course, highlighted, but not only. The first parak casts man as just part of the general bria on day number 6, towards the end of day number 6, without much hullabaloo. And he's part of nature. He's not that much different from the other elements that Hashem created during those 6 days. But the second parak is focused upon man. It doesn't discuss the planets, doesn't discuss darkness and light, doesn't discuss much. It just discusses the fact that the ground was bare. And the reason the ground was bare was because there was no man to work that land. And then immediately the parak surges into the description of the creation of man and the commandments and instructions given to man. Rabbi Soloveitchik famously in The Lonely Man of Faith distinguished philosophically how man views himself vis-a-vis his universe. Is he part of the universe? Is he different from it? Adam 1 and Adam 2. I want to discuss 4 other Pesukim, less existential, less philosophical, but each of them formative and foundational, specifically because they appear before the sin, and they describe not punishments for the sin or new world orders that HaKadosh Baruch Hu landscapes after the sin, but these are foundational. They're part of our DNA. This is how we were when we were pure and pristine, and this is how we still are, because not much change. Obviously, the Yetzer Hara became internalized. Obviously, there's certain ownership that we incurred, but the belief that we can look back at those murky moments before the Chet, and the Chet itself is murky, and tease out foundational elements of human identity and religious identity. So I want to discuss 4 Pesukim and just pay a little more attention when you read on Simchas Torah, or if you're listening to this after Simchas Torah, when you read Parshas Bereishit, to that second parak. The first parak has very little to teach us about man in general. The first parak doesn't, the second parak does, and in most cases it's really about man in general, not just Jews, humanity, because Adam is just a human being. Although there is a famous statement by the Baal HaTanya, which, even though the pasuk is universal, the Baal HaTanya narrowed into a more nationalistic pasuk. So the first thing that leaps out is, of course, as I mentioned before, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to create his world, or certain parts of the world, because of man. So v'chol seach hasad terem yeh ba'aretz, the grass and the vegetation had yet to grow. V'chol esav hasad terem yitzmach, ki lo m'tir Hashem elokim al haaretz. Hashem had yet to provide rain, because there was no man. And now that Hashem is at the stage where he wants to create man, so he creates a mist, whether the mist is to create man or the mist is to create rain and vegetation. And at that point, he creates man. Vayitzer Hashem elokim es ha'adam afar min ha'adama. So this is, of course, not a chronological timeline. This is more an axiological or logical timeline, that cause and effect. The reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the grass and the vegetation and the food and the crops and the rain, and at least the potential for the land to produce food and nutrition, was because man was on the way. Man was at the doorstep of history, of human history. And how you work out the timelines, that goes back to Rashi in the first parak, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the grass earlier in the week, but the grass was at the ground level. It had yet to peer through the ground, and Hashem waited until the 6th day when man appeared for the grass to actually sprout forth, the grass, the vegetation, the crops, and the nutritional capacity of the earth to actually produce itself. And in this causality, cause and effect, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the entire world because man is about to arrive, because man is about to enter the universe, it reaffirms the supremacy of man as the masterpiece of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the purpose of this world is to serve human interests and human needs so that human beings can bring Hashem into this world. We're the only people with sanctity and sacral knowledge and free will, and we can serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu and think about an other beyond ourselves. So the world serves man so that man can serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even without needling in or diving under the hood about God creating man, which obviously it's explicit in the Pasuk, it establishes man as not just a part of the evolutionary tree alongside of apes. Remember, there are two parts to Darwin. One is the theological component. Did Hashem create man, as the Torah writes, or did man just evolve as part of a broader evolutionary wheel? But the second part is, once you accept Darwin's notion that man shares evolutionary DNA, even if, let's say, you in theory believe that God created man, but he created him as part of some larger evolutionary reality, then man doesn't really have any distinctiveness, superiority, supremacy. He's not different than the apes, and this has led in our day to a muddling or a confusing, an erosion of the difference between human beings and animals and animal rights. And again, animal rights are important. Tzar Ba'alei Chayim, Hashem doesn't want us to act cruelly. There's several mitzvahs that at least hint to that, and there's an issur possibly d'oraisa of Tzar Ba'alei Chayim, but not because animals have rights that are akin to human beings, and not because it's a very clear hierarchy that places man and positions man at the apogee of this pyramid of creation. And that second parak stresses that. Hashem, in the second parak, only creates the world, as it were, because human beings are going to be created. And the world is created to serve man, something you don't get from the first parak. At that point, Hashem puts him into Gan Eden, and he plants trees there, and rivers to provide water and health and nutrition. And Hashem places, Vayikach Hashem Elokim es ha'adam vayinicheu began Eden, li'avda u'l'shamra, a very famous couplet of words, li'avda u'l'shamra. So the shamra hints at what I said earlier, that we are custodians of this world, and as much as we want to try to harness the potential of this world, to advance the world, to create creativity, and our Masorah is not something we have to steal from Hashem, Chas v'shalom, he hands it to us, Matzei Shabbos, by delivering fire to us, rather than, let's say, L'havdil in Greek mythology, where Prometheus has to steal fire from the gods, and he's punished for it, he's bound to a rock. Hashem delivers creativity and wants us to change our world and improve our world and re-landscape our world, but he also wants us to preserve more or less the terms of our world. And whether that is an environmentalist message, not necessarily in sync with some of our environmentalist messages that are popular in our culture, Mother Nature, or man doesn't have the right, man has the right, but because he is the masterpiece of creation, he's not just the beneficiary, he's also the steward or the custodian. And it also makes us think about how far we push back the frontiers of science and creativity, something which a lot of people are thinking about today now that we are creating creativity, and how will creating creativity not just change the way we view ourselves, which is probably the more important question, but also change the world that Hashem delivered to us, and where's the line, where's the Shatnez line, you could call it, as opposed to the Maginot line in France in World War II, where's the Shatnez line? The Shatnez line is clearly the line beyond which we're not meant to pass. We're not meant to combine flax and cotton and linen, wool and linen. We're not meant to combine certain types of fruits, certain types of animals. And where's that line between creativity and surpassing the boundaries that Hashem wants us to maintain? It's hard to know, but that word l'shamra reminds us that while we are loved, we're also l'shamra. So it's a dynamic between li'avda and l'shamra. But the word li'avda doesn't just mean to process this world and to advance the world, as opposed to l'shamra, to preserve and to protect its original pristine form. But li'avda literally means to work, which means that work in Sefer Bereishit and work in Parshas Bereishit is not just a curse. You could have said, well, in Gan Eden, man wasn't expected to toil at all, and all that toil is just a product of b'zeh sapecha tochel lechem, but the ideal state of man is to be in absolute repose and lacking any work and an endless vacation. And Rav Lichtenstein pointed out to us that no, that work is built into the DNA of human identity. It ennobles human character. Adam Harishon was expected to work even before the sin, li'ovda l'shamra. Now, obviously, it would have been different. It wouldn't have been that much of a strain. It wouldn't have been wouldn't have come with so much frustration and so much hard toil and effort and futility. And Rav Aaron spoke to us so often about building a healthy work ethic and a work ethos and not being lazy. And there's not the time or place to elaborate Rav Lichtenstein's belief and stress of a work ethic. But this is a pasuk that he would always lead with. he would lead with this pasuk in Bereishit that work is a defining character of human identity. It's not just a fallback consequence of sin. And Hashem wants people to work. And when you don't work, you are less of a human being. And when you work hard, you're more of a human being. And that metric of how hard you work isn't just expressed by how hard you work in Talmud Torah and Avodas Hashem in the ritual sense, although that's the primary sphere that you should exert toil and energy. But in every area, you shouldn't be afraid to work and you shouldn't fall into laziness. So that's another pasuk that defines who we are as human beings, even before we sin, and certainly before Matan Torah, which is well off into the horizon in Parashat Yisro. The third pasuk, and again, Rav Lichtenstein stressed this, is after Hashem delivered Adam Harishon le'avda l'shama, vayitzav Hashem elokim al Adam le'mor, mikol eitz hagan ochel tochel, u'meitz hadas tovara lo tochel. Hashem commanded Adam Harishon, you should eat from all the trees in the garden, but don't eat from the eitz hadas. And we typically believe that the instructions focused on not partaking of the eitz hadas, but Rav Lichtenstein believed that the concept of tzivoy was overarching. Hashem commanded Adam, eat from all the trees and don't eat from the eitz hadas. Now, what does it mean for the tzivoy to encompass even the trees you are eating from? Well, let's say that day Adam wasn't hungry. He has a mitzvah to eat a fruit from a tree. That's what the pasuk suggests. Vayitzav Hashem elokim al Adam le'mor mikol eitz hagan ochel tochel. How does the tzivoy to eat from all the trees manifest itself? Is it just a passive tzivoy? If you absolve or void eating from the eitz hadas, you have ipso facto inherently not eaten from the eitz hadas and avoided the isur and v'vekayim the mitzvah. Rav Lichtenstein felt no, that there are two different types of tzivoy. There's the I'm using my words, micro tzivoy, the isur, the mitzvah in general in our life as of the Hashem. But let me take a different tact. How do you view the world of Rishus? Is there a world of Rishus? Is there a realm of Rishus? So on one end of the spectrum, people would say, of course, as long as it isn't addressed by mitzvos and averos, then do what you'd like. On the other end of the spectrum, people would say, there is no such moment in our life which isn't addressed by mitzvos and averos. And if you parse it, you could get to a moment where every single second you're facing, if you're a man, just think about Talmud Torah. So Talmud Torah, you're chayav to learn every second available, as the Rambam writes. So you can create a world in which there is no gray space, that everything is a tzivoy. And on the other hand, some people feel like Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem, there's the world of halacha, and then everything else is just free to make your own decisions. And Rav Lichtenstein carved out that middle space where there is a world of rishus in which you can make choices about what you want to do, and those choices aren't dictated by a mitzvah or an avera, but they're still dictated by Ratzon Hashem, moral conscience. So you should never feel that you're operating outside of Vaitzaveo. Even when your Adam Arishon is just eating from, I don't know, a orange tree, or he's eating maybe a rimon tree. I don't think the Chazal say that rimon was one of the Eitz Hadas. So it was an Eitz Hadas, an apple tree. So he has no tzivoy, there's no lav or mitzvah, but Hashem wants him to eat in a certain way, not overeating, not stealing. It's not he can steal from anyone, but there's a larger message that even when you're not confronting mitzvahs and averos per se, you're still operating under the rubric of a tzivoy Hashem, even if that tzivoy can't be or shouldn't be translated into details every moment. What does Hashem want from me when I'm taking a walk? What does Hashem want from me at business? What does Hashem want from me in my marriage? What does Hashem want from me as I drive in the roads? And I think it stretches and incorporates avodas Hashem, that there are differences. Learning Torah, performing a mitzvah, avoiding an avera is one type of avodas Hashem. And then when you leave that space of ritual, those dalat amos shel halacha, as we would say, so you don't necessarily stretch or have to stretch mitzvahs and averos to cover that space, but you're still operating under the aegis and the supervision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It isn't just a free reign to behave as you'd like and as you choose, as long as you can avoid mitzvahs and averos. It's a little bit like the Ramban in Kedoshim Tiyu, don't be a novel b'shus Torah. But the Ramban is operating in a very, very limited space. Don't overeat, don't have too much sexual encounter, don't drink too much wine. Okay, so don't be indulgent. But for Lichtenstein, it was not just don't be indulgent, but leave a lifestyle that sees itself as being informed by the Ratzon Hashem. So these are three Pesukim in Parak Beis, all of which teach us a little bit about human identity. Excuse me. Number one is that human beings are at the apogee, the zenith of the pyramid, and reality, creation, was intended to serve human beings so that we can serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number two, because we are at that apogee, we have custodial responsibility to this world, l'shemra. Number three, I guess, that same pasuk of the work is not a curse Work is part of what Hashem sees as human identity. And then number 3 is even when you're not avoiding Yisurim or performing mitzvahs, you're still engaged in Tzivu Hashem, Vayitzaveu Hashem, V'sav Hashem Elokim, Mikol Eitz Hagan Achel Tochel. Now, of course, I'm turning back to the creation of man, and this is, of course, a very famous 4-word phrase, Vayipach bi'apav nishmas chayim. When Hashem created man, He breathed into him the breath of life, nishmas chayim, the neshama of life, however you interpret neshama, but Vayipach is obvious, He breathed into him. Now, this was the source, of course, for the most famous, probably one of the most famous phrases in all of Chassidus, in, I think, Perek Beis of the Sefer Atanya, Man de nafach midilei nafach, when you breathe as opposed to when you speak. When I speak, the air is emerging from my voice box and my larynx, moving up my throat to my mouth. When I breathe, it comes from my belly, it comes from my gut, it comes from my diaphragm. So deep breaths come from someplace deeper. And as the Zohar says, Man de nafach midilei nafach. So Hashem, by breathing life into human beings, actually breathed part of His essence into human beings. Now, I keep using the word human beings because that's the context, but certainly those who know the Tanya know that He created a hierarchy, and that within that hierarchy, this breath from Hashem, which He described as Nefesh Eloka Mimal Mamish, which I'll describe in a moment, part of Hashem Himself, Kivayachal, does not apply to non-Jews. And I don't think it's a racist statement. It's just, and there's almost a separate constitution and a separate system that defines non-Jews. It his period, He wasn't really addressing the relation with Jews and non-Jews. It doesn't come up that much. He was looking to describe Jewish identity, to deconstruct Jewish identity. But what's interesting is He lifts a pasuk that's meant to be universal, and He applies it not just in a narrow field, but He contrasts that this pasuk of V'yipach be'apav only applies to Jews. Non-Jews don't have the man de nafach midilei nafach, this part of Hashem, nefesh eloka mimal mamish. But for Jews, what it does revolutionize is as follows. We believe, before Chassidus, that we're created in the image of Hashem, which means we have a whole set of capacities and faculties that are similar to Hashem, being topped off with free will, and with that free will and volition, we can decide what path in life to take. We aren't driven by hormones and instincts and internal needs and urges. But if we rebel, then we can find ourselves very distant from Hashem, and there's always a path back for tshuva, but we can push ourselves, as the Rambam says, situate ourselves in a place that's very, very far from Hashem. Whereas in Chassidus, in the Tanya's Chassidus, if there's a part of Hashem within you, then as far as you stray, you're still with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that distance really doesn't change that much. It's a little bit different from the Rambam in Achas Tshuva Perek Zayin, a little bit different from Yonah, who runs from Hashem and then has to rebridge himself and restitch himself back to Hashem through Tefillah. Here, if you have Hashem in you, you can't hide from yourself. You can't run from yourself. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is within each human being, Vayipach be'apav nishmas chayim, and that leads to the whole doctrine that as much as a person sins, he really isn't internally a sinner, because his internal core is defined by an essence of Hashem, nefesh eloka mimal mamish, and number 2, not only does sin not define him, but it doesn't really create that much distance from Hashem, because you can't create distance from yourself. So these are 4 fascinating foundational Pesukim in Parshas Bereishit in Perek Beis about man. First 3 about man, the 4th, according to the Tanya, is about Jewish person. Number 1, the world was created for man. We have responsibilities towards nature, towards animals, l'shamra, but we are meant to harness the potential of this world for human advance and for the advance of the human condition. Number 2, work isn't a curse, work isn't a punishment. Work hard in all facets of life, because that's part of Hashem's design for human experience. Number 3, everything is part of Hashem's tzivu, even if it can't be parsed into a particular mitzvah and avera, because otherwise it only had one avera, only one isser. And finally, according to the Balatanya, Vayipach be'apav, Hashem delivered, breathed into, infused into every Jew a part of Himself, which changes how we view ourselves when we sin, and changes whether we feel we're distant from Hashem or perennially close and in the precincts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.